going to do something a little different this morning. Instead of, we're going to pass the mic, and I had asked everybody previously just their name, their association, or where they're from if you're not with a business or something, okay? So the congressman has an idea of who's here. Then we will put the congressman on because some people might have to get up and go to work, okay? Does that work for you guys? Okay, Marcy is coming around with more coffee for everybody. So I think I'm going to hand this over to the mayor and let him start it out.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a nice crowd on such a rainy morning, but the rain's not so bad either this time of year. Glad to have you here. We have the privilege of welcoming Congressman Van Hollen from the 8th District to us. Welcome to the 1st District, Congressman. We're glad to have you. The land of crabs and sunshine and surf, you know. You can tell that by looking at the Blue Ridge Mountains to the west there. But we're glad to have you with us. I'm very interested in hearing what the congressman has to say today. We had the privilege of our own Congressman Andy Harris being here a couple months ago, and he gave us some great words. So I'm kind of anxious to hear the report from the 8th District. So we're gonna get into that in very few minutes. You notice Nancy's wearing purple, I'm wearing purple, and we just thought we would start Purple Fridays a little early this year. You know, it's never too early to encourage our Ravens to their next Super Bowl victory. So we're on the way. Not too much burgundy and gold up here. So.
I understand that.
But a little bit.
I love the Ravens too, all right?
Good. I'll send the mic around. I know we have a lot of political dignitaries with us, and I'll let them introduce themselves as they come, but our two senators, Getty and Brinkley, are here. Our commissioners, Robin Frazier and Dave Roush, are here. Two councilmen, Diane Frazier and Angelo Zambetti, are here from the city. And I don't know whether I missed any other politicians or not, but if I did, I am sorry.
I think the congressman kind of speaks for himself. He was elected to Congress in 2002. He's the son of a foreign service officer, and he lived and studied abroad for many years. So he remained active in issues relating to foreign policy and national security. He's got a wide range, as you will hear, you know, of different kind of things that he's interested in. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Congressman Chris Van Hollen.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Can you hear me okay? All right. Well, it's great to be here in Taneytown, and look forward to trying to get to know more of you as time goes on as a result of the redistricting. As you heard, it happened at the congressional level, of course, at the state level as well. The 8th Congressional District now includes big parts of Montgomery County, Frederick County, Carroll County. It doesn't include this particular, the city of Taneytown, which, as was said, is in the 1st District, but there are lots of people in this region, obviously, who are part of the 8th Congressional District. So look forward to having the opportunity to get to know all of you better. Nancy, thank you for the invitation. Anybody, I've gotten to know Nancy, my staff's gotten to know Nancy. You don't say no to Nancy, and it's great. It's great to be up here. In fact, when we were trying to decide where we're going to locate our district office in the Carroll, Frederick area, we turned to Nancy. She pushed Taneytown first, I should say, but we were looking for a place that could accommodate as many people between the two counties. We're in Mount Airy, which of course is on the border. I should say we're in the Carroll County part of Mount Airy. Nancy made sure of that. But it is great to be here. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your hospitality, and I look forward to working with you. And it's great to see our two senators here, David Brinkley, Joe Getty. Had the privilege of working with both of them in the Maryland General Assembly, and look forward to continuing to do that. And as a result of redistricting at the state level, I guess there's going to be a little bit of a transition. But I think the reason they're both here and why I'm here in the 1st is because the lines don't make as much difference when you've got people who are part of a larger community. So it's great to be with you this morning. As Nancy said, look, there's a whole lot going on in terms of the challenges we face in our country, whether it's international challenges or challenges here on the home front. And Congress is debating a number of issues, from immigration reform to implementation of health care to all sorts of issues. But we're also obviously talking about budget issues and the economy. And what I thought I would do this morning is focus my remarks there and then open it up for questions on anything you want to talk about. I should say in the Congress, like the state legislature, we open every day with a prayer from a visiting minister, rabbi. And it wasn't that long ago that we had a minister visiting who started to say the prayer out loud and then abruptly stopped. And a number of us went up and said to him, why did you do that? Why did you start the prayer out loud and then suddenly stop? Surely you were praying for the 435 members of Congress. And the minister shook his head and said, no. You see, I started to do that, but then I looked out at the 435 members of Congress and decided I better pray for the American people instead. So I know there's some of that sentiment out there right now with respect to the Congress. When you look at Congress, there's obviously a lot of debate, to put it diplomatically, but my hope is that as a result of that back and forth, ultimately we will have some forward progress on some important issues. I know it doesn't always seem that way, and it can be very frustrating at times, I know, for the public, I will say, as well as for some members of Congress. But I do hope that we're able to move forward on a couple things. So let me just say a word about the economy. The good news is the American economy is growing after a very difficult recession a number of years back. The bad news is it's not growing as fast as it could or should, in my view. If you look at the first quarter growth in this country, it was about 1.8% growth revised. If you look at the figures from this past month, 190,000 jobs were created in the country, but the unemployment rate in the country remained at 7.6%, historically a high figure. Now, in Maryland, we usually do and are running better than the national averages, both in terms of our growth as well as our unemployment rate. So in Maryland, instead of 7.6% unemployment rate, we're running in the 6% range, but still too high. I should say within Maryland, Carroll, Frederick, and Montgomery counties tend to do a little bit better than the state average when it comes to the unemployment rate. But again, the overall message is that it's still too high, and we still have a lot of people who are looking hard for work and can't find work. And so a lot of untapped potential in the economy in Maryland and around the country. And I'm sure there are lots of ideas as to how we can do better, and I look forward to hearing your ideas about that, whether it's more investment in education, issues dealing with regulation. But one thing that we should and can do in Congress is to replace what's called the sequester. And I want to say a word about the sequester, because these are these very deep and very abrupt and very arbitrary cuts in a certain category of federal spending. And they are creating some drag on the economy. Not a huge drag. It's not as if you replace the sequester tomorrow, all of a sudden all systems go on the economy. But it is providing a drag on the economy at a time when we shouldn't be doing anything in terms of self-inflicted wounds on the economy. It's not my analysis alone, that we have the independent, nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that says that these across-the-board cuts will result in this calendar year in 750,000 fewer jobs in the country. And I know it's real because I know in our district, I hear from some employers, for example, in the biotech sector, that they've imposed hiring freezes because the National Institutes of Health budget has seen significant cutbacks And as a result of those cutbacks, they're able to fund many fewer promising research grants. These are grants that are proposed to try and look for new cures and treatments to things like cancer and other diseases that hit every American family at some point or another. But because of that cutback in the NIH budget, they're accepting fewer grants, promising grants, according to Dr. Collins, the head of NIH. And as a result of that, a lot of biotech businesses in this region and around the country are reducing their operations. And that has an impact on the economy. And so those jobs that the Congressional Budget Office is talking about lost, they're not people who are actually, they're not people being thrown out of their jobs. It's just a result of businesses, small businesses, large businesses, not hiring as much as they might otherwise hire. And so their figure is 750,000 jobs. And they say that if you had not had the sequester in place in this year, economic growth would have been about 1/3 higher than it otherwise would be. 0.6% GDP, doesn't sound like a big number, but as I say, it translates, according to CBO, into 750,000 jobs across the country. So we should not be doing that at this point in time. I mentioned an example of the cuts on the what we call the domestic side of the budget, NIH. In the defense area, the cuts are also very real. And you may have seen just recently they announced the furloughs for 650,000 civilian defense employees. And that has a pretty big impact across the country. It has a big impact here in Maryland. We have a fair number of defense installations, including right here in Frederick, Fort Detrick. You got 1,000 people being furloughed there. Now, you know, they're not losing their jobs, but they're going to work and be paid for 1 day less per week starting in July. So for that period of time, from July to the end of to October 1, that's a 20% cut in their income. So that's hard on their families. It has an impact on the community. They got to cut back a little. You know, you don't go bowl as much, you don't go out as much, and if you multiply that, you know, throughout Maryland, throughout the country, again, it creates this unnecessary drag on the economy. Down in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is the home of the 82nd Airborne, a lot of kids go to school on the military base. Their teachers are being furloughed. So kids of men and women who are, you know, fighting to defend our freedoms overseas, their kids are going to be out of school for 5 days just this fall because of the sequester. It makes no sense, the cuts on the defense side or on the non-defense side. So how did we get there? And I just want to talk about that because I think we do need to replace it. So back in 2010, Congress recognized that we needed to address our long-term deficit issue because we absolutely have to get our long-term deficits under control. And so we passed something called the Budget Control Act. And it had two big pieces. One piece was immediate cuts and cuts over a 10-year period to this portion of the budget we call discretionary, the discretionary budget. Now bear with me 1 minute because I want to, there's been some confusion about this issue and I want to explain the context here. The discretionary part of the budget, which is the part being most impacted by the sequester, represents less than 40% of the entire US budget. So some of the biggest parts of our budget really are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, some of the farm programs. There are a whole range of programs that are, quote, mandatory spending. They're kind of on automatic pilot, right? When you turn 65, you're eligible for Medicare. You're eligible for Social Security. Those programs, Social Security, Medicare, those other mandatory, represent well over 50% of our budget. And for the most part, they're not being touched by the sequester, with some small exceptions. Medicare providers take a 2% cut across the board, which is also detrimental, but the cuts to that part of the budget are dramatically limited. So when you hear about the sequester cuts, they may sound small in terms of the total US budget, and they are relatively small in the context of that total budget. But in the context of the part of the budget that they hit, they're pretty high. So as part of the Budget Control Act in 2010, we did two things. As I said, one, we decided to cut this part of the budget by capping it over a period of time. And that's already baked in before the sequester. So we did $1.2 trillion in cuts to the federal budget, discretionary budget, over 10 years by saying we're going to limit and cap the amount of spending in that budget. Limit defense spending and limit the non-defense spending. Non-defense spending, in addition to things like NIH, it's the other things you think of as the functions of the federal government. FBI, Homeland Security, education funding, health programs, public health programs. I mean, there are a whole range, Veterans Administration, a whole range of things that are part of that discretionary budget. So what we did was we said we're going to cap the spending in the out years in that budget by $1.2 trillion. But we also think that we've got to make additional reductions to our deficit over a period of time. So we got to come up with at least another $1.2 trillion in cuts over that 10-year period. But because Congress couldn't agree on how they were going to do that, how we were going to do the other $1.2 trillion, whether it was going to be cuts in parts of the Medicare budget or whether the mandatory budget, or whether it would be cuts, or whether we would raise some revenue by closing some tax breaks, because there was an inability to agree on exactly how we were going to get the additional $1.2 trillion, a mechanism was put in place saying that if Congress cannot agree to another way to do it, you're going to have these across the board, another $1.2 trillion cuts on the discretionary side of the budget, another $1.2 trillion. And that's what the sequester is. And essentially half of them fall on the defense side of the budget and half of them fall on the non-defense budget. Why is that? Because if you look at that category of the budget, the 40% that's discretionary, a little over half of that is just the Defense Department. So in terms of the ongoing operation of the US government discretionary budget, over half of that is the Defense Department. So when you apply these across the board cuts, about half, a little over half apply to the Defense Department and half apply to everything else, NIH, FBI, border security, all the other things. So a lot of us think that it doesn't, what Congress as an entity on a bipartisan basis at the time that was done said this doesn't make sense to do it that way. Now, over the last 2 years, there are some members of Congress who changed their mind and say they want to keep that sequester in place. And I would strongly argue there is a much better way to achieve that deficit reduction than these across-the-board cuts to discretionary spending. And many of us have put forward proposals to do that that are based on bipartisan recommendations by groups like Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles. These are guys who looked at the budget and said to reduce the deficit in a balanced way over a period of time. So as we go through the fall here, into the fall in Congress, and we get to the beginning of our next fiscal year, which begins on October 1st in the federal government, we're going to have this ongoing debate about whether or not we should keep the sequester, or if we replace it, how we replace it. And I just hope everybody will be, part of that conversation, because it's part of the conversation over our entire national budget and our different priorities. Now, before I take questions, I just want to mention one thing in closing, which has to do with our veterans. We exempted, as we should have on a bipartisan basis, the Veterans Administration from the sequester. It's the one part of the discretionary budget that I talked about that we said we're not going to touch because of the fact that these are men and women who have served our country, and we're going to make sure that they get the support that they need through the veterans hospitals. We've got in this congressional district, in addition, in the 8th congressional district, in addition to a lot of people who work at Fort Detrick. Fort Detrick itself is in the 6th, but in addition, a lot of people work at Fort Detrick. We also have the Walter Reed Military Medical Center, which is the nation's sort of premier hospital for treating our wounded warriors. And there are lots of men and women who arrive at Walter Reed with very severe wounds. Because of the incredible medical technology and progress, the good news is a lot of people who we would have lost in earlier wars from their wounds are able to be saved. As a result of that, a lot of these men and women have severe traumatic brain injury, and as a result, post-traumatic stress syndrome. So it's incumbent upon us as a country to make sure that we provide those men and women with all the support they deserve. There's also an issue related to making sure people get their disability benefits, veterans. There's been an incredible backlog at the VA, including in the Baltimore VA. We are trying our best to get the Veterans Administration and the Defense Department to better coordinate and eliminate that backlog as soon as possible. We got to move from a paper system to a more electronic system because the number of, the demand on the system has grown dramatically as a result of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. More and more people, as I said, coming home with different kinds of disabilities, and it's important that we remove that backlog. But I did want to mention that with respect to the sequester, the Congress made a very deliberate effort to exempt the Veterans Administration. That doesn't mean, I should say, that other programs that benefit lots of other people in trouble, including our veterans, are not impacted. They are. And I should point out, just in closing, that I talked about the civilian defense furloughs at the Defense Department. A lot of those civilian defense employees at the Defense Department are themselves veterans. And so they are being impacted in that way. But let me just close where I ended, which is where I started, to say I appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to the opportunity to work with you on issues that may be of particular concern to you, whether they're national issues or issues that impact us as Marylanders or as citizens of Taneytown. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you've got, whether they're on the foreign policy front or the domestic front or any issue you want to bring up. But thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate it.
Congressman, I sent an article to Karen McManus the other day, so hopefully you had a chance to review it. But as a retired disabled veteran, there's a lot of concerns in veterans that I speak to, and already actions being taken against veterans that have a service-connected disability in reducing it. Now, it's a well-known fact that the VA in Baltimore is rated last in the nation. So many of us, to include me, have had to wait 1 to 3 years, had to jump through hoops and go through all kinds of exams to get our service-connected disabilities. Now, this new founded 9-member committee is going to be reviewing a number of veteran issues and others, which I guess, without saying it directly, they're going to start cutting all over the place. So all promises made to veterans that have done the dance, getting their deserved disability payments, now we're going to have to go back and see another doctor who's going to say, I don't think this is so serious. Well, get in the body. I mean, this is just disgusting. I know one veteran, a Marine, that literally had his disability cut just the way I just described. I'm just wondering, what's going on with this new 9-member panel?
No, I thank. Yeah, I understand, and I did. I read the article you sent along, so thank you for sending that along. There are two issues really in the question you asked. One on disability, and then disability issues for veterans, and then the issue of this 9-member commission. And because the 9-member commission's sort of charter is fairly broad, but it is also limited in certain ways. So with respect to disability, the disability backlog, there's no doubt. I mean, the Baltimore VA has been it has been rated number 1 in the bad column, right? Which is not a distinction you want to have. And We have called in General Shinseki, we meaning the Maryland congressional delegation, on a bipartisan basis, and we have gone through with them step by step what their action plan is to try and deal with the backlog in Maryland, but also around the country. But our focus was on the VA in Baltimore. And you know, they have, as a result, put in a lot more resources. We're going to depend on our veterans to let us know, you know, whether or not the service is improving. They have assured us that it will, and they've given us their action plan for how they're going to get there. Now, in terms of changing the rules on disability eligibility, I'm not familiar with anything that's being done in that particular area, and I would strongly oppose any effort to try and change the definitions in a way that would deny veterans the disability benefits that they're due. Now, the 9-member panel is not, to my knowledge, looking at the disability issue. What they're looking at is more and on a prospective basis, primarily. In other words, not related to current retirees. They're looking at things like the military retirement system, not to go back retroactively to change anybody's retirement benefits, but to look to see whether or not the retirement benefit structure for our armed forces makes sense going forward. As you know, I mean, the way it works right now is if you're in for 20 years, essentially you accumulate no retirement benefit. After 20 years, you begin to accumulate at a pretty rapid rate. So if someone retires from the Defense Department when they're 40 and then goes to work in the private sector, they've gotten a very good retirement package. So, and that's fitting. The question is whether or not this system of, you know, really nothing for the first 20 years and then, you know, a generous retirement for people who retire at 40, whether that configuration makes the most sense going forward. There are also, and I don't know if it's in the purview of this commission, there are some proposals to look at within the, for example, the TRICARE system. There are proposals to look at things like increased co-pays and things like that. And the Congress has resisted those changes, but those are also issues that are percolating. But I think the primary purpose of the 9-member commission is to look long range to the future with respect to future retirees and what the system will be. But you know, we will keep a close look at it. And I appreciate your sending me the article.
Questions?
Yes.
Morning. Could you talk for a few minutes about tax reform?
Sure. So tax reform is been an ongoing debate in the United States Congress. Now, the thing about tax reform is it means lots of different things to different people. So there's no doubt, in my view, that we should try and simplify our tax code. There is a lot of what I would call junk in the tax code, meaning some things that were put in there that provide deductions and exemptions for certain interests that don't have the public interest at heart. There are also other things in the tax code that have a strong public purpose, and it would be, you know, you have to be very careful on how you deal with them. I mean, one example, and one of the major deductions in our tax code, of course, is the home interest deduction, all right? So when people buy a home, they get to deduct the mortgage interest. That has been a deliberate policy through the tax code to try and encourage home ownership. So you got to be really careful, in my view, when you mess with that. The housing market really took a huge dive during the financial crisis, obviously. It is now beginning to recover. That's good news. But you don't want to do anything that would jeopardize or put that at risk. Now, are there some things you can do in the tax reform area with respect to all deductions or exemptions, and their idea is that for very, very high income earners, over $1 million a year, as part of our effort to reduce our deficit, could you begin to limit the overall number of deductions, not any particular deduction, but the overall value of deductions. So for example, obviously a higher income individual gets a greater deduction because they're in a higher tax bracket, right? So if you're in the highest tax bracket, you now get a 39% deduction, whereas for your mortgage interest, whereas somebody who's in the 28% tax bracket gets a 28% deduction. So their proposal is to say, well, look, even if you're in the higher income tax bracket, your overall value of your deductions might be limited more to something in the 28% range. That's a proposal that's out there. But with respect to tax reform, while there are things we can do to simplify the code, if you're asking me what I think the prospects are in the coming months for significant tax reform, I would say that they are not that high because, again, tax reform is something that everybody's for until they start to get into the details. So let's take corporate tax reform, which applies to the corporate tax code. We should lower our corporate tax rate. I mean, the United States has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. Interestingly, the effective tax rate that corporations pay is actually not that high. So why is that? How can you have one of the highest tax rates, but an overall lower effective tax rate? Well, it's because businesses like individuals get to take their deductions, right? So there's the research and development tax credit. There's the accelerated depreciation credit. Again, all things that may have some good policy basis. But what it means is that while corporations start with a high tax rate, by the time they take a lot of their deductions, they can get it way down. General Electric has become, they got an army of lawyers. They paid for a number of years recently a zero effective tax rate. Many U.S. corporations operating overseas have used different techniques, been lots of articles about them, to dramatically lower their taxes. So we've got to address that issue in my mind, and we should do that now. But there's been a lot of resistance to some of those changes. So this September, both in the House and the Senate, I think you're going to see a lot of proposals on tax reform. How far they will progress in this calendar year, I don't know. I think you're going to have a lot of focus on that, but I'm not sure if there are going to be any significant changes. And again, I want to distinguish a little bit between the corporate side of the tax code and the individual side of the tax code. So, but, thanks.
Good morning. Same question, same suggestion. Immigration reform. And sorry, I don't want to discriminate against accents, but it looks like only our country gives citizenship by place where a child was born. And if taking business of my jewelry, it's recent, I retired from state of Maryland being supervisor in welfare office, and illegal immigrants were taking advantage when they had a child on our soil that was giving them chance to have child who was a citizen and that they here permanently. Can that be reversed? Child belongs to parents, not to the soil where child was born. At least if one parent is legal, that is fine. But I had parents who came pregnant from Canada in a trunk of the car. She was not Canadian citizen, but she gave birth here, and we were paying her TANF money. So that is also to welfare reform, which in 1996 started and died very quietly, and I think they connected. And I'm not sure we can change anything right now, but if that could change, because a lot of illegal immigrants receiving TANF money for their children, and in Maryland there is state TANF. It's state temporary cash assistance for parents who are not eligible for federal money, but Maryland pays money. So this is something what might need to have another look.
So there are a couple issues, right? So Congress right now is in the middle of debating, as you know, the question of immigration reform. The issue you're raising is related, but it's a distinct question about how do you become a United States citizen, and the Constitution has been interpreted to say very clearly that if you're born in the United States, you're a United States citizen. I mean, so that's a constitutional question. People can litigate that, but I think that if somebody wanted to change that, that would require quite a process to do. Now, let me just say a word about immigration reform generally, because it is being obviously discussed. And we've got a situation where you've got lots of people who have come here illegally. It's interesting, a lot of those people came across borders illegally, but a lot of the people also came legally on visas and overstayed their visas. In fact, the number's quite high. I mean, like half the people came legally originally on visas, overstayed their visas. So, I mean, we have the other issue is that border security has been, it's certainly not, it's far from perfect, but it has been strengthened dramatically recently. So the number of apprehensions in terms of the percentage control over the border is much higher than it used to be. Again, there are other things you can do, and one of the things the Senate proposal did was dramatically increase the amount of resources for the border. I mean, there are questions about whether the marginal benefits of that additional money are worth the added border security. That's something people will look at. But we obviously need to deal with the border security piece. Then the question is, what do we do with people who have come here unauthorized, illegally, overstayed visas, come here legally but overstayed visas? And the reality is that we now have there are about 10 to 11 million people in the country that way. And this is obviously a heated emotional debate. My view, and I think, is that it doesn't make sense to say you're going to deport 11 million people. A lot of these people have been here a very long time by now. I mean, a long time. They've settled into a lot of communities. Some haven't. Some are more recent. So what do you do? I mean, you have a broken system right now. So obviously, one part of it is to try and make sure that you deal with the border. And again, there are a number of additional proposals there. One is, and this is to have a system with respect to employers. Employers are in a tough position in many ways because they don't necessarily know whether the people they're hiring came here illegally or not. So there are systems being put in place called E-Verify, Employer Verify, that would allow employers to do that. And given the fact that most people come here in search of job opportunities, which is another reason why it's slowed down, is because when our economy slowed down, fewer people were drawn here because of the economy. But that's why they come. And so to the extent employers are not hiring people who are not here legally, obviously there's less incentive to come here for that purpose. So as part of a system where you deal with the E-Verify and the border security, the proposal is to allow people to pay back penalties, fines, and get legal status, and over a period of time earn their way potentially over a 13-year pathway to citizenship. Now, most of the analysis has been done, not all, there are conflicting things, but again, the Congressional Budget Office analysis came out and said that by allowing people to come out from the underground and fully participating in our economy, we would actually grow the economy. We would strengthen Social Security because a lot of people who are working under the table now are not paying into the Social Security system. And so they would then be paying into the Social Security system. Anyway, your question, while it was related to citizenship, it obviously raised these larger questions about immigration reform bill. And we are working our way through that, right? The Senate passed a bipartisan bill. Speaker of the House has said that he doesn't support that bill. He's going to try and take it, working on some other bills. We'll have to see how all of this plays out in the end. But let me close by saying one thing that we've been really clear about in the Senate bill, as it relates, for example, to the Affordable Care Act, which is the people who are just who get this provisional legal status will not be eligible, for example, to go into the health care exchange. They will not be eligible for tax credits. Now, people who over a period of time earn their citizenship, and again, as I say, there's like a 13-year path then at that point in time. So you'll actually have a situation for a period of time where people who are here legally are paying taxes into the system, but not getting all the benefits of a full citizen in the system. And that's, part of the idea was that, again, there's got to be some penalty, but we also want to provide an opportunity for people to come out of the shadows, not just in their interest, as I say, it's in the larger interest, in my view, again, this is a heated debate, of the country and the economy.
If they can pay back to the state for benefits, welfare benefits they got, not only whatever else, but welfare.
Well, the situation you were raising relates to their kids who are legal citizens under the Constitution. So what I'm talking about is in terms of people who are here illegally, who are here legally, they're not getting TANF, they're not getting health care system. But you're right, for kids who are here legally, again, of the 11 million, I think it's the number of people who came here, kids of parents, is a relatively small portion. Most of these, again, at least half the people came on visas and overstayed, and then you've got a lot of other people who came across the border in search of work. And when our economy was doing well, a lot of employers here in the United States hired them.
Bob, one more. No, Bob.
Congressman, first off, welcome to Carroll County.
Thank you.
I know we can talk about individual issues and probably won't even be able to do it all in one day.
No way, you're right.
Well, I have a question that's just kind of an umbrella question.
Yeah.
I think the majority of the people in this room even would say that we believe that Congress and the Senate are just out of touch with the normal citizens' problem. I mean, most of us are having trouble, keeping our head above water, and our legs are getting tired, and Congress and Senate don't seem to understand that. And they go off on tangents that don't seem to make any sense. And just when I start to think that it is making sense, somebody comes along like our fellow Marylander, Congress Lady Donna Edwards, arguing the Wednesday, July 10th, Baltimore Sun. She wants to propose legislation to create a national park on the moon. What? It's probably already cost us money just in what she's doing with paperwork and everything else. There are real problems out here. This makes us believe that y'all don't get it.
Well, let me just say, I appreciate the look. I haven't read the article. I will go talk to Donna about. I would be happy to have the article. Again, I haven't read the article, but I could not agree with you more in this that our focus in Congress needs to be on jobs and the economy and issues that are affecting people in their everyday lives. And that's why I wanted to start my comments by focusing on some of the things that Congress could do immediately, in my view, to at least take some of the drag off the economy. And I know sometimes the sequester, for example, seems remote, but it has this wave effect, right? I mean, again, at Fort Detrick, just a small example, when 1,000 people are furloughed and they get 20% less income for the remainder of the year, that has a little ripple effect on the economy. You magnify that throughout Maryland and the economy, and it's big. And I would point out that Maryland, one of the reasons Maryland historically has better economic growth and lower unemployment than the rest of the country, like it or not, one of the reasons is that we're very close to the federal government. And in fact, Maryland ranks we're a mid-sized state population-wise. We rank third in the country in terms of the amount of federal monies spent purchasing goods and services. That number does not include federal employees. That includes federal government purchases of goods and services from big, medium, and small businesses and contractors in the state. And even if someone is not one of those businesses themselves, they are often somehow attached to them in the larger Maryland economy. The good news about Maryland is our economy is diversified over time. We're not as dependent as we used to be on those expenditures. But again, I would just point out that the sequester I talked about nationally because of its impact nationally, but it has a disproportionate negative impact in this region. But again, our focus should be on that. I didn't talk about infrastructure investment. That's an area where I think we should be doing more, both at the federal level, state level. We need more private-public partnerships in some of those areas, but we have very high unemployment rates still in the construction industry. We have a lot of unmet infrastructure needs in the country. It seems to me that's a no-brainer. So those are the kind of issues that I've been focused on in Congress, and I look forward to hearing from you on other matters as well.
I think that just kind of reinforces
look.
what the pastor said in the prayer.
Yeah.
All
right. Look, there are 435. Look, lots of issues, right? And we can focus on some big issues, but there are obviously other issues that we didn't talk a lot, obviously, this morning about some of the other issues. There are the foreign policy issues and all those issues as well. So, but I think that the focus should be, our focus should be on exactly what you said, which is my focus. We're still in a spot where, while the economy's growing, it's still not growing fast enough. Huge untapped potential. Let me just give you this one last figure in closing. I know you got it. So, in terms of the deficit, next year, over 1/2 of the deficit, the difference between spending and what we spend in revenue coming in, in fact, close to 2/3 is as a result of the fact that the economy is not at full employment. In other words, another way to put it, if our economy were at full employment, then next year, our next year deficit would be closed by 2/3. It would only be 1/3 the size of others. So the key focus has to be getting the economy in a higher gear. So thank you all very much for your attention. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So.
You want to stay for a little while?
Yeah, no, I'm
Okay.
sticking around.
Okay.
When do you start the bowling? That's what I want to know. All right.
Okay, we will. Next month, Senator Brinkley will be our speaker, right? Yep. What's not happening in Maryland, is that it?
Am I on next month?
Yep, you're on next month. And then Senator Joe Getty the following month?
Good.
Very good. All right, see you guys next month.